What's happening is condominiums are dropping the average, whereas freehold properties are bringing the average up. Today's video, the 12 most expensive areas in the year that was 2020 in Toronto real estate. We're gonna break them down and go through them. Hello everyone, this is Sam from SaberiSixRealEstate and Remax Realtron Realty Inc. As always, you can find my contact information in the description box. Feel free to get in touch, subscribe, comment, rate, and review as well if you want. As always, it goes without saying, only do that if you want, and if you find my content and videos informative and enjoyable, go ahead and support. If not, don't do that and do the opposite. Anyways, let's get to today's video. The 12 most expensive areas in the year that was 2020 for Toronto real estate and the Toronto real estate market. Now, let me make a couple of prefaces as I always make in these types of videos. These are general areas. I'm going based on TREB areas, so TREB codes, C1, W7, whatever it may be. So you have to keep in mind that we're doing general areas. These are large land masses as well. Interior in itself is general. We're doing the average price across all property types. I mean, that's as general as you can get. So if you wish to have a finer understanding of your area or someone else's area, whatever it may be, you have to look at community per community, neighborhood per neighborhood, street per street. And I do that for all my clients, but for these videos, that would be far too long. It would take 2 hours. Preface number 2, this is year-to-date numbers up to November. Obviously, we don't have the December numbers in full because December numbers come out in January of 2021. So we're doing year-to-date, from January to November, average prices and the most expensive for this list. For number 12, the most expensive areas in Toronto real estate for the year 2020 was E3, coming in at $1.106 million. So this was based on 876 transactions. And you have to understand that the number of transactions makes a difference, right? Certain areas you only have 500 transactions, certain areas you have 800. The larger the number of transactions, the better it is in certain aspects. For instance, if an average price of, let's say, $2 million is based on 20 transactions versus 100 transactions, you know, that gap in 80 makes a difference. Now, another key thing to keep in mind is that we should ideally look at the number of transactions relative to the number of inventory, but we'll get to that later on in the list. If you're not familiar with E3, it's Danforth area, the Danforth Village, East York area. Next up, the 11th most expensive area in Toronto real estate for the year 2020 was C11. For number 11, C11, coming in at an average price of $1.117 million based on 300 transactions or so. Off the bat, you should notice a trend because C11 just resides marginally north of E3, the number 12th entry on this list, and it's Leaside and those areas. So as you can see off the bat, the lower end of this list, which is still the most expensive areas, but the cheapest entries on this list relative to, once again, to what the list is, resides in that eastern block of the city, where it goes from southeast to a little bit of mid-east with C11. We go to the west side of the city for number 10, the 10th most expensive area in Toronto real estate for 2020, which is W1, coming in at $1.144 million based on 500 transactions. As I said earlier, the number of transactions are important, but you have to look at the number of transactions relative to the number of listings available. So, for instance, let's say we're looking at an area and the average price is 1.5 million based on 5 transactions. But if we look and we see that, hey, there were 6 listings or 10 listings, basically inventory, based on the number of inventory available, 5 is a lot. So we could derive certain conclusions from that. But if it's 5 transactions based on, for let's say, 100 listings, or so 100 available inventory for that year, then we can't derive too much. Point being, the number of transactions in and of themselves don't really tell us much. However, with reference to the number of listings available, they do tell us a lot. And for W1, it was 549 transactions based on 1,000 available inventory / listings for that year. So about 50%. W1 is the High Park area, and you might be wondering, well, why is that not more expensive? Well, first off, once again, this is the most expensive list. So even the 10th entry on this list, it's still an expensive area. Number 2, you have to understand that a lot of properties there, freehold properties, are older. Not to say there isn't a lot of development occurring, but relative to the central locations, still on the older side. Next up, the 9th entry on this list for the most expensive areas in Toronto real estate for the year 2020 is W2. So we stay on the west side of the city with W2, coming in at $1.152 million for the year 2020 based on 860 transactions. So off the bat, from W1 to W2, you see a jump, even though they're very close to each other. The available inventory in W2 exceeded that of W1. Number 8 most expensive area in Toronto real estate for the year 2020 was E1 for the average price of $1.195 million. So we're slowly entering the $1.2 million threshold. In fact, the next entry on this list will exceed the $1.2 million threshold. And this was based on 781 transactions. For the next entry on this list, we're going to remain on the east side at number 7, which is E2, coming in at an average price of $1.276 million for the year 2020 based on 754 transactions. So let me break these two areas down in conjunction with one another, because you might be wondering, well, why is E2 more expensive than E1? Well, first off, because E2 houses more detached homes, whereas E1, although it houses a lot of detached or freehold, sorry, I meant to say freehold properties, is still more condominiums as compared to E2. And as we know, based on 2020 real estate and all the videos I've made and all the analysis and projections that I've made and that have come true, is that condominiums have been struggling, and these areas have two forces in conjunction with one another, at least looking at it after March, right? Because these are year-to-date numbers. What's happening is condominiums are dropping the average, whereas freehold properties are bringing the average up. So the average price really is somewhat of an equilibrium between a force, going upwards and another force going downwards. And naturally, E1 has more condominiums, so the average drops a bit, and nonetheless it is a bit of a less desirable area as compared to E2. Freehold properties go for more in those areas as compared to certain properties of E1. The 6th most expensive area in Toronto real estate for the year 2020 is W7, coming in at an average price of $1.350 million. Once again, the number of transactions is low here, it's 213, but if we look at it relative to the number of listings available, it's 50%, because the number of listings available for that year was about 500, I believe, or 400. So yeah, no, sorry, 400. So it's about 50%. Here we're gonna enter the top 5. Now from here on in, we'll see all centrals. No more E's, no more W's. What does this say to us? Well, number 1, central areas is very intuitive, most in demand. Even for condominiums that have been struggling, more so in central locations as compared to the eastern, western, northern counterparts. What we can still surmise is, even though the biggest drop in prices have occurred in central areas for condos are still more expensive than condos, for instance, in York region, right? In Vaughan, in Richmond Hill, and certain areas of Scarborough. So first and foremost, the biggest drop has occurred for condo prices in central locations, but that does not mean they're the cheapest areas, right? It's just the biggest drop. Number 2, detached, semi-detached freehold properties are always in demand everywhere, but more so in central locations. Naturally, the average prices will be higher in central locations. So for those reasons, it makes perfect sense why the central locations are still the most expensive areas. Coming in at number 5, we see a $300K jump from the previous entry and an average price of $1.6 million for C2 based on 685 transactions. C2 is the Wenchwood, Yonge St Annex area. It's definitely one of the more expensive areas in downtown, especially compared to C1. C1, even though it's really the core, the entertainment district of downtown, it houses a lot more condominiums than C2. Naturally, C1 is not as expensive because the condos, once again, are bringing the prices down. And condos, even a hot condo market, are cheaper than freehold properties. So if another area has more freehold properties, then it's going to be higher in average price. 4th most expensive area in Toronto real estate for the year 2020 is C3. Once again, remaining in the central location. Coming in at $1.702 million based on 468 transactions. Going forward with number 3, C4, coming in at an average price of $2.028 million. Now we have finally broken the $2 million threshold. And it was obviously finally broken at the 3rd most expensive area in Toronto real estate. I mean, think about it. $2 million average, that's very, very high. It's hard. I know we're going through numbers, but it's sometimes difficult to wrap your head around the fact that the average, just the average, is $2 million. And this is based on 679 transactions. Once again, it's not based on 15 transactions, or I know that's a ridiculous example, but like for instance, it's not based on 200 transactions for 700 available inventory. No, it's based on 679 transactions. And the reason C4 is such an expensive area is because it's perfectly situated in Midtown, where a lot of people, you do have an understanding of the suburb way of life versus being very close in proximity still nonetheless, with all the joys and amenities that come with living in a metropolis such as Toronto. Second entry on this list, the second most expensive area in Toronto real estate for the year 2020 was C9, coming in at an average price of $2.3 million for the year 2020. It was once again based on 232 transactions, which relative to the number of inventory is a very healthy number. And lastly, the most expensive area in Toronto real estate for the year 2020 was C12, coming in at an average price of $2.7 million based on 304 transactions. Just to explain why C12 is the most expensive area, is as luxurious as the previous entries in the top three were, this is the most luxurious area by, obviously it's subjective, but by price and both who lives there. I mean, I believe Drake lives in C12, right? So it should give you a clue and understanding of what kind of, homeowners you're referring to. The multi-million-dollar mansions that exists in C4 also exist in C12 as well, and some. So, you have that naturally, and also it's a very good area. It's a wonderful area. Going forward for our projections for 2021, I'm going to do these lists quarterly, I think. I don't know if that's too much of a workload for me, but going forward for 2021, I would not be shocked whatsoever if, for instance, some of these areas are in the 1.7, 1.9 range per average price, break into the 2 million. Now, I don't think C12 is going to break into the 3 million. I could see it going towards, for year-to-date numbers, to 2.9 million. I would not be shocked if we see a $3 million average year-to-date by 2022. But we're going to get very close in, for instance, 2021 for obviously C12, not the other areas that are closer to 1 million, right? That would be a ridiculous jump. Even for Toronto real estate, I don't see that happening. So as always, this is Sam from Saberi Real Estate, Remax Realtron Realty Inc. Find my contact information in the description box. Feel free to subscribe, comment, rate, and review, and like if you want. If you don't want to do that, don't do that. And have a very nice day. Thank you very much.